Roll for Crit presents how to play Terra Mystica in 5 minutes or less or more. Terra Mystica is the fantasy game of transformation, power, and development, designed by Helga Ostertag and Jens Drogemuller. Your goal in Terra Mystica is to gain the most victory points by developing your faction and expanding your presence on the board. Each player will begin with their own unique faction board, which comes with a set of pieces in your color: dwellings, trading houses, temples, a stronghold, and a sanctuary, plus some priests and bridges. And you'll have some additional markers on your faction board, on the cult board, and at the 20-point space of the victory track. The top right of your faction board will indicate your starting resources, such as workers, coins, or priests. Resources in your possession should be placed on top of your faction board when you receive them. While you do have priests and bridges in your color, they don't technically belong to you unless you're explicitly told to build or gain them. You'll be making use of workers, priests, and coins to pay various action costs such as building and upgrading. You also have one other important resource on your board, which is power, represented by these purple tokens in these 3 spaces called bowls. Anytime you gain power during the game, you'll move the relevant amount of tokens from bowl 1 to bowl 2. If bowl 1 is empty and you gain power again, then tokens move from bowl 2 to bowl 3. In order to spend power later on, you'll need to move it from bowl 3 back into bowl 1. If all your tokens are in bowl 3, you can't gain additional power until after you spend some. In addition to starting resources, each faction gets to advance one or more of their markers on the cult board. The cult board features 4 tracks: fire, water, earth, and air. For each colored cult symbol in the top right of your faction board, move your marker up on the relevant track at the start of the game. Next to the cult board is the main board, made up of hexagonal spaces, each with its own terrain type. Before the game begins, each player, starting with the first player and going clockwise, gets to take one of their dwellings and place it onto any empty space on the board, matching their home terrain. Your home terrain is indicated here on your faction board. When placing dwellings, always take from the leftmost available piece on your board. After each player has placed their first dwelling, they get to place a second dwelling the same way, this time in reverse order. Finally, each player chooses one bonus tile, again in reverse order starting with the last player. There will be a number of bonus tiles available, each one offering a different type of reward. Any unchosen tiles left over have a coin placed on top of them for later. As a general note, before we go any further, I'll point out that each faction in the game has its own unique abilities and different costs for different actions. In this video, I'll go over the basic rules that generally apply to everybody, but there's an exception for almost everything, depending on which factions you're playing with, so keep that in mind. Terra Mystica takes place over 6 rounds, with each round consisting of 3 phases: income, actions, and cleanup. First, in the income phase, each player receives resources based on a few different factors. Check all the empty structure spaces on your faction board. At the start of the game, you'll just have a few of these because all you've placed so far are your initial dwellings. These instruct you to receive some new worker cubes from the supply. Later on, as more of your structures are removed and placed onto the board, you'll gain more resources of different types as part of your income. You might also get extra income from your chosen bonus tile or a favor tile later on. Just look for the icon of a hand holding a resource, as that always indicates something gained during this income phase. Remember, gained resources are placed onto your faction board, and gained power tokens are moved from one bowl to the next, depending on where they are. Next is the action phase. During this phase, the first player takes a turn choosing and performing one action, followed by the next player, and so on until all players have passed for the round. There are 8 primary actions to choose from. Let's start with the transform and build action. This is how you'll take all those dwellings on your faction board and place them onto the main board. First, pay the indicated cost. Then place your leftmost dwelling onto an empty space matching your home terrain type and color. During setup, those were the only restrictions, but now your chosen space must also be adjacent to one of your existing structures on the board. Any 2 terrains sharing a side are considered directly adjacent. 2 terrains that are separated by 1 or more river spaces may be considered indirectly adjacent, depending on your shipping track, which we'll cover next. Initially, you won't be able to build past these rivers, but we'll see how that can change later on. If you build a dwelling in a space adjacent to another player's structures, they can receive power according to the power level of said structures, either 1, 2, or 3 power for each adjacent structure according to the guide on your board. The catch is that in order to receive this power, they must be willing to spend their own victory points, an amount equal to 1 lower than the total power they will earn. They can choose not to receive this power, but they can't just take some of it. It's all or nothing. It might seem difficult at first to build a new dwelling, as there are no adjacent spaces of the same terrain type on the board, but you need to build in an adjacent space of your home terrain. That's why this is called the transform and build action and not just the build action. Before you place a dwelling, you get the opportunity to magically transform an an empty space adjacent to one of your existing structures from one terrain into another of your choice by placing a new terrain tile on top of it. In order to do this, however, you have to pay a cost in the form of spades, another resource type. You'll notice that all the terrain types are represented on your faction board in a circle. In order to transform a space, you need to pay 1 spade for each step between its original terrain type and your desired new terrain type, to a maximum of 3. You can move in either direction on this circle for the purposes of calculating the cost. There are no tokens to represent spades. Instead, you must spend spades as soon as you get them, or forfeit their use. You may gain spades from various special actions, bonus tiles, or more commonly by spending an amount of workers according to your faction's exchange track. You can spend as many workers as you need to during this action to get enough spades to transform. However, you can only transform 1 space this way. You don't have to build on it after transforming, but if you don't, another player could occupy it before you get the chance. In order to make spades cheaper and easier to acquire, you can use an action on your turn to advance your exchange track marker 1 space. Pay the indicated cost, receive 6 victory points, and now spades will cost you fewer workers. Anytime you see this icon with a number in it, by the way, that means you get that many victory points by advancing your point marker. Next to the exchange track on your board is your shipping track. Another action you can take is to advance your marker here. Again, spend the indicated cost and gain the indicated victory points. The shipping track allows you to build dwellings on spaces that are indirectly adjacent to structures you've already built, separated by a river, with either 1, 2, or 3 river spaces in between them, depending on how far you've advanced on the shipping track. This will give you more room to grow during a build action. But what about all these other structures on your board? In order to make use of those, you'll need to upgrade your existing dwellings, which is our next action, allowing you to choose and upgrade one of your previously built structures, according to the path laid out to you on your faction board. In order to upgrade a dwelling and turn it into a trading house, spend the cost next to that section of your board. Take the leftmost trading house and replace the dwelling with it, returning said dwelling back to the rightmost empty space in your dwelling section. Once you have a trading house on the board, you can take this action to upgrade it into either your stronghold or a temple. And then, one of your temples can be upgraded into a sanctuary. Each new structure comes with its own cost and newly revealed benefits, such as more income at the start of each round. But remember, the old structure comes back and will cover up a previously uncovered income space. When you place a temple or a sanctuary, you also get to take 1 favor tile. There are several favor tiles to choose from. Each one will allow you to advance on the cult track a number of spaces, and may provide another benefit such as extra income or enhancing an action. Remember how building a dwelling can give power to players with adjacent structures? Well, upgrading presents the same opportunity again, to trade victory points for power depending on which structures other players have adjacent to the one you are upgrading. If you ever have 4 of your structures directly adjacent to each other and their combined power level totals 7 or more, that grouping is known as a town. If you found a town, you get to choose 1 town tile and place it underneath one of those structures. You receive whatever bonus is printed on said tile immediately, including a key, which will come into play with the cult tracks later on. If you add more structures to an existing town, it's still just 1 town. But if you connect 2 towns that were previously separate, they retain their town statuses. Your next action choice is to take one of your priests and place it onto a vacant space at the bottom of one of the 4 cult tracks. This will instantly advance your marker in that track a number of spaces equal to the number printed there. But you won't get that priest back again for the rest of the game. If you want to hang on to your priest, you can instead spend it to your supply to move up just 1 space on any of the tracks. If your marker moves past one of these power symbols on a cult track, you gain the indicated amount of power. The final space of each track only has room for 1 player, so whoever gets there first keeps it to themselves. But each requires a separate key, so if you don't have any towns, you won't be reaching that point. With all these different ways to gain power, you're probably wondering what to do with it. Well, on the main board, underneath the map, there are 6 power actions. Each one has a power cost, which you of course pay by moving that amount from Bowl 3 back into Bowl 1 in exchange for an action. These actions can gain you various resources, including spades. Reminder, you must spend spades immediately, but you can exchange workers for extra spades at the same time if you need any. If you gain 2 or more spades at once, and you only need 1 spade to transform an adjacent space, you are allowed to use the extra spade or spades to transform a different adjacent space. But you can only build a dwelling on one of these 2 spaces at that time. This action allows you to build a bridge. Take one of your bridges and place it across a river space next to any of your structures, and now it's considered directly adjacent to the space it connects to. If you don't have enough power to take a power action, but you really want to, you can sacrifice power. This means that you can immediately move power from Bowl 2 to Bowl 3 as part of your action, but for each power you move this way, you have to remove an additional power token from Bowl 2 for the rest of the game. After using a power action, cover it up with an action token, as it won't be available to any players for the rest of the round. This is also the case for any other special actions represented by this orange outline that you might have access to from bonus tiles or favor tiles. Some factions gain access to their own special action after building their stronghold. Something else you can do on your turn that doesn't count as your action is converting resources into other resources. Follow the guide on your faction board to make exchanges between power, workers, coins, etc. as much as you're able to as you see fit. Oh, and while you're taking all these actions, you're also going to want to keep an eye on these scoring tiles on the side of the board. Each round, one of them will be active, and every time you meet the condition depicted on its left side, such as building a specific structure or gaining spades, you also gain the indicated amount of victory points. The right side of each tile depicts a bonus you can receive in the next phase if you're far enough along on the indicated cult track. If there are no actions left that you're willing or able to take, maybe because you're out of resources or you want to save them for later, you can use your turn to pass. If you're the first player to pass, you become the starting player in the next round. Then you return your bonus tile to the available selection and take one of the ones no one else took to use in the following round. If there are any coins on it, you get those too. If someone else passed before you, you can also choose to take the tile that they returned. Note that some bonus tiles give victory points when they're returned for specific structures that you've built. Once all players have passed, Phase 3 begins. First, go back to those cult bonuses on the right side of the scoring tiles. Players receive the indicated reward if their marker has moved that many spaces on the indicated cult track. If it's covered that required distance multiple times, they get the reward multiple times. If the bonus you receive from this is spades, you don't get to spend workers for more, and you can't build dwellings afterward. Now, any action tokens that have been placed are removed, another coin is added to any unchosen bonus tiles, and the previous round's scoring tile is turned face down. A new round begins with a new income phase. In the 6th and final round, you'll skip the cult scoring and cleanup phase and go straight to final scoring. At this time, players receive points for each cult track in different amounts, depending on if they're first, second, or third highest amongst all players. You also get points for having the first, second, or third highest number of structures that are connected either directly or indirectly on the board, depending on your shipping track. And you get 1 extra point for every 3 coins you have left, which you can convert other resources into if needed. The player with the highest total at the end of the game wins. In conclusion, gain income, transform, build, worship, prosper. That's Terra Mystica in a nutshell. Did you get all that?